When it comes to the music industry as a whole, more often than not, new music is released in one of two formats, either a single or an album. There are exceptions for stuff like compilations, mixtapes, and reissues, but there's this very interesting middle ground that's not too common called an EP. Now, you watching this video very likely know what an EP is, and you think it's ridiculous that I would even say it's not a common release format. Well, if that's you, it's because you are very likely a fan of EDM, electronic dance music. And when it comes to which genre in the entire overarching music industry that most commonly utilizes this extended play format, it's without a shadow of a doubt EDM. I very honestly can't really put a finger on why EDM as a whole is filled with so many EPs, but if I had to take a stab at it, I would assume it's because EDM has this unique characteristic of any genre, whereas there's so much variety in tone, style, subgenre, BPM, and sound design, all within that's classified as EDM. I mean, if you really think about it, garage, dubstep, downtempo, hardstyle, future bass, trance, dance pop, breakbeat, all these genres are vastly different from one another, but because they are made primarily on a computer, they fall under that EDM umbrella. And with all that variety and sound at the fingertips of every producer, it's easy to experiment with a new style or sound for a quick project like an EP without having to commit to a larger project like an album. But that's enough of a spiel about EPs, and you're here because you want to know what EPs I thought were the best of 2024. So without any further ado, here's my list for the top 10 EDM EPs of 2024. I'm not lying when I say that 2024 has been without a doubt the strongest year for EPs this side of the 2020s. The sheer amount of variety, excellence, and creativity we got from all realms of EDM was simply immaculate. We saw some veterans pump out some of the strongest work in years, and a ton of newcomers try to make a new name for themselves. This first entrant on my list is actually the one I'm most excited about. Yeah, it's only number 10 on this list, but I've watched this guy grow from some of the earliest stages of his musical career, and this EP is a real turning point for him. Convexity has slowly been building up his catalog of releases with a smattering of EPs on Rushdown and Circus Electric, and even some singles on the main Circus label, Disciple, and even Monster Cat. But my goodness, Disciple gave him the green light for this 5-track EP, and Convexity did not disappoint one bit. Never. Transmissions is a beautifully bizarre fusion of rhythm and vaporwave aesthetics that scratches a really unique itch within the rhythm space that feels quite fresh. While Convexity is balancing two adjacent genres, he's still keeping some of his signature sound design and soloing at the forefront of this project. This is without a doubt his highest quality, most complete piece of work. This EP has the really unique ability to be both avant-garde and deeply nostalgic. Convexity has seemingly always had a flavor for this certain type of grounded sci-fi aesthetic, akin to the likes of Quantum Entanglement or Being Stuck in the Backrooms. But more often than not, they were more reserved, pulled back kind of piece of sound design that Convexity was very intentional about not making distracting. But he fully embraced it this time around and hit every mark every step along the way. You've got stuff like this kind of old school telephone advert on Freak Week, or the journey into quantum mechanics on Alice Ring. This EP is truly the culmination of Convexity working for years on his own unique sound design and style. And boy, do I love that he keeps going off on those synth runs. If Convexity isn't on your radar in 2025, you are doing something wrong, my friend. I've always had a soft spot for the sounds of UK garage. Maybe it's my Canadian blood that remembers where it came from, or maybe the genre is actually just the best. Regardless, this year was a good one for garage lovers. I felt like all facets of the genre got a facelift in 2024, whether it's the more cutting-edge sounds of future garage or the sounds that stay true to its roots. Garage, in my opinion, was the strongest holistic genre of 2024, and that's mainly thanks to projects like this. Oppidan is relatively new within the scene, having released his first song under this alias back in 2020, which in the grand scheme of music production is a fairly short timeline. But in that time, he's been able to carve out a real niche of garage production that lives off the heels of funky two-step grooves. Untitled Signs is a pleasing 5-track EP of smooth production quality, crisp drum kit work, and a plethora of catchy vocal chops. Of all the tracks here though, I think Fresh and New has to be my favorite, as it really embodies that foundationally UK style of UK garage, as London MC Frisco jumps onto the track and delivers a standout performance.
I live by faith, not sight though. When your heart pure, man, you walk with the right glow. Back when we used to move reckless.
And the biggest track of the EP, Mr. Sandman, covers the iconic, well, Mr. Sandman. And while this exact cover isn't anything super new to the space, as the first track of the EP, Oppidan essentially establishes that he can play around with classics and modernize them, as well as creating something fresh and new, which is the track that immediately follows. I'm really looking forward to what 2025 will bring for Oppidan. He's relatively come out of the gate swinging, and with the early streaming success that Mr. Sandman brought him, I have no doubt that whatever this next year holds for him, he'll tackle it head on. As I alluded to earlier, the overarching umbrella EDM category really does cover a wide variety of styles and sounds. And one of those cusper subgenres that I would still say falls under that EDM adjacent category is indietronica. Typically a less get up and dance type of genre and more of a this is super creative and pleasing to listen to, indietronica always has a soft spot in my heart. And I especially love when I find a new artist I haven't heard of before and they immediately blow me away. And this time, I got a 2-for-1 deal. Both Tennyson and Leslie were new artists I discovered in 2024, and I almost feel bad for not knowing about them earlier. That being said, it means I have a ton of new music to go back to and listen to, which is always a treat. But this might just be the modern indietronica EP right here. This project is a more vocally driven, narratively dense project of laid-back, calming production. These two have struck the perfect balance of light synthesized sounds and raw, natural instrumentation. This is unlike anything I've heard in indietronica this year. I have a sweet spot in particular for when artists can do a real good job of balancing those natural and synthesized sounds. It's a delicate balance that, if done without care, could easily land you on my year-end worsts list. But that's definitely not the case here. Turnaround in particular is definitely up there with some of my favorite songs of the year. The plucky, minimalistic synths paired with these kind of soft, skin-tight percussion hits make for a melody of pure bliss.
Just turn around, turn around.
In fact, all throughout this EP, the most consistent tonal elements are those soft percussion sounds. By keeping one core sound fairly consistent through the whole track list, gives the whole project the sense of cohesion and togetherness while providing a foundational sound that I will now forever associate with this project. When it comes to these year in review videos that I do, I'm not sure if you all recognize it or really even care about it, but I'm typically late to putting out these year-end lists. Typically, critics and content creators try to get their final lists out right before the last week before Christmas. Very little music comes out in the last 2 weeks of the year, and because everyone is already doing their lists at that time, I can sometimes feel like I'm behind when these videos come out in January. That being said, I really do prefer doing things that way because I might miss out on a release. I might have missed out on this one. Released just a few days before Christmas, TURQUOISEDEATH's FURTHERWORLD EP is straight up my favorite project of theirs, and that's really saying something. Just 2 months prior, they released their sophomore solo album in Kaleidoscope, which saw critical reception from fans for its atmospheric breakbeat and drum and bass production. And while there are still many similar tonal and stylistic similarities between those two projects, FURTHERWORLD does feel like its own complete package, rather than a bunch of extras that didn't make it on Kaleidoscope. What really puts this EP above their LP for me was the presence of more jungle-style production. Don't get me wrong, I love the atmospheric side of their production, and there's still a lot here to latch onto and love, but the more straightforward sound design of the jungle aesthetic gives the whole project a deep sense of nostalgia for me. This is yet another project that feels simultaneously modern and old school. The light drum work and long, soft synth sustains feel deeply 90s Eurodance, while the more fast-paced breakbeat sections sound like modern underground EDM. And I don't think there is a more stronger, more exactly that sounding song than Ocean Wisp. This track is everything I've already mentioned, plus an abundance of stuttering sound design and jittery synths. I know TURQUOISEDEATH will be a new artist for many of you, so the best way I can describe this track in particular is like if Porter Robinson's song Dull Scythe was actually good. Maybe that's a hot take. Regardless, this is just a better version of that song. TURQUOISEDEATH closed out the year on an incredibly high note for me. I typically have a dislike towards projects that are part of a larger project that has already been released or to be released as a whole. It's a trend that makes sense in the modern EDM landscape of getting your tracks out there right away and or building an era of an individual style across multiple projects, but it more often than not feels disingenuous to me. But sometimes I can't ignore how insanely good a Volume 1 can truly be. There is a lot of aggressive, faster, dark drum and bass out there. It feels like every week I was getting hit with a new one of these types of tracks, and I constantly felt like I was hearing the same thing time and time again. But deep into November of 2024, 1788L dropped what might be one of the best drum and bass EPs out there. In execution and in all honesty, this EP isn't doing anything way above and beyond your typical dense drum and bass. But what it does do is take an established formula and really grind things down to the minute details of what makes it so good and expand upon those ideas. Mixing in a slew of complextro and electro-leaning production elements, New Type Volume 1 is an incredibly well-polished and packaged unit of banger after banger. Opting in for essentially a fully instrumental set of tracks, the lack of vocal prominence felt like I was really able to hone in on the small details of each track. And that's a very impressive feat to accomplish in itself. Within the drum and bass scene specifically, I tend to find that a lack of vocals can make a tune relatively boring. But 1788L was quite intentional about constantly switching up the lead melodies and soundscapes throughout all these tracks to keep me eagerly wanting more. And in terms of eagerly wanting more, I'm very anticipatory for whatever further installment this new type project will become. Are we gonna get another EP, multiple EPs, a larger album? I guess we'll have to wait for time to let us know. I've already alluded to it once before in this video, but I'm a sucker for natural sounding electronic music. Picturesque soundscapes, beautiful instrumentation, and the return to nature. I think I've always really loved those natural tones because electronic music is inherently not that. It's primarily made on computers using strings of ones and zeros to make something audible that's worth listening to. Honestly, the more I think about it, the more it just kind of feels like magic. And when it comes to that natural sounding electronic dance music, it doesn't get much better than this. I have always had a soft spot for Daktyl and his style of production. I even loved his dive into a more hip-hop adjacent underground sound with his pair of 2023 Benny Ola collaboration projects in Chaos Theory Part 1 and 2. But when we got Idols, the very first single from this EP in early mid 2024, I was pretty much immediately hooked. If I had to describe this album in one word, I think it would be serene. Even the vocalists that Daktyl brought in for this project all brought their own signature soft and tranquil vocal inflections. But each of the 7 tracks here offer a different slice of scenic life. I really think that this is Daktyl's most complete work of music yet. Holistically, the tracklist has no real weak points, all well sounding, especially cohesive front to back. Even the more digital sounding jittery tracks like Wave tonally match with the relatively straightforward tracks like Blackwater. This is one of those projects where what I'm currently doing, talking about it, doesn't nearly do as much justice as listening to it does. I absolutely adore Daktyl as an artist. He's shown his versatility in genre and tone these last 2 years, and he's getting to the point where everything he touches is just gold. If you were to ask 100 people what EDM sounds like, I feel like 70 to 80% of those people will tell you it's dubstep. The two have sort of become synonymous with one another over the last decade, and over that time though, I felt like the core dubstep sound hasn't really expanded or changed a whole ton. I think it has moved in different directions for sure, don't get me wrong. But now in 2025, you've got melodic dubstep, vomit step, bro step, rhythm, and so much more. But I just feel like that core OG dubstep sound has stayed pretty linear relative to what it's branched out into. So when I heard this EP for the first time, I felt like I was listening to history in the making.
That's right, it's another hot one.
Tape B's Distortion Theory is the quintessential modern dubstep EP. Never have I heard a project that feels so perfectly in line with both the modern trends of dubstep in 2024, while also honoring the past from which it grew. Tape B has crafted something truly unique with this EP, and that can't be understated. You've got a mixture of grime, bro step, some rhythm, some old school liquid dubstep, yet it all has a layer of polish across the whole thing that makes it truly feel like it's a modern record. For your core dubstep audience, this EP has a little bit of everything for everyone. You've got your big, abrasive, harsh moments on tracks like Nocturnal. You've got more liquid-like, almost ballad moments on tracks like Someone to Hold. And even the grime and wonky tones on tracks like You Know What I'm Talking About.
You know what I'm talking about.
I feel like more often than not, producers nowadays aren't necessarily afraid to tackle a more classic sounding dubstep record. It's more like they don't want to tread on what feels like sacred territory. I would go as far as to say producers have also actively tried to stay away from that early 2010s dubstep style as to try to not feel like they're just a Skrillex or Flux Pavilion clone. Even those two are great examples of how dubstep has diversified and evolved in various other directions, not so much in a straight line. So major props to Tape B for tackling a project that is truly a modern dubstep record. Up to this point, my list here has mainly comprised of newer artists to the overarching EDM scene. That's not to say that older artists have lost their touch. No, that's not what I'm alluding to at all. But what makes EPs in particular so special in this industry is that it's easier to experiment and substantially quicker to make than an album would lend itself to. So it's safe to say that if a more veteran artist were to land on this list, it would be either because they explored a whole new sound palette or stayed incredibly true to their already established identity as a producer. And this next one, very much the latter. Feed Me's Vintage Rally Championship takes all the years of experience he's had in the game and lays it all out on the table for one absolutely stellar record. Looking at the factual elements of this EP, it's a relatively long one that stretches out to just under 30 minutes and is 7 songs deep of various subgenres and styles. I quite frankly think this is Feed Me's best project ever, LPs and EPs included. Feed Me continually showcases his prowess as a producer and creative thinker. While there may not be any grand major tracks on this EP, every single track here is its own complex, well-crafted story to tell. This is peak Feed Me. You've got garage, you've got electro, dubstep, house, techno, all while keeping the core tone of this EP on track the entire way through. If anything, this is just a showcase record, a portfolio of elite level production and recognition that Feed Me is still one of the greatest in the EDM space. Giant Creatures sounds like classic old school electro or complextro Feed Me, while Hyperharmonic tackles the breakout genre that was techno this year, showcasing his prowess of creativity within a fairly stale genre in 2024. And don't get me started on Road Trip Sleeper. I honestly believe that in a blind listening test, you could get die-hard EDM fans to tell you that this was Daft Punk. Honestly, this track feels like an ode to discovery, and the sounds that very likely inspired a lot of this project. This may not be the flashiest of EPs this year, but this is an EDM lover's dream EP. Almost as if Feed Me crafted this project to specifically appeal to hardcore fans like myself. And I must say, I'm honored to have heard this. One of the downsides of producing an EP over an album is that you often don't have as much runway to adopt a dense narrative or tell a larger story at hand. So when an artist can piece together a 6-track EP that both offers a great deal of variety in genre and envelop you in a whole new world, you're doing something right. YMIR's The Fae takes the listener on a journey through a magical forest full of occult mysticism and the forlorn cries of wild beasts. This is simply YMIR's best piece of music. Not only does he take us through an esoteric narrative, but each track is a different hit of heavy electronic production. Dubstep, drum and bass, mid-tempo, ambiance, this project seemingly has it all. With absolutely no shock to anyone, a strong point of this record are YMIR's vocal performances. As an artist who both produces tracks himself and continually appears as vocal features on other producers' tracks, YMIR has this 1-2 combo of production quality and vocal vigor that is hard to come by.
That's why I am letting go of.
To me, this EP tells the story of a protagonist in a mystical world. This protagonist is on a journey of some sort, fighting their way through the lands for a promise of some kind of eternal reward at the end. It follows a battle that ultimately ensues in victory, and then betrayal of that reward not being as the protagonist expected it to be. Their eventual coming to terms with what they've done, and then the final ascension into some form of afterlife. This is one of those pieces of music that is so brilliant as to the fact that listeners can find much enjoyment just on the surface level, listening to just the basic sounds of this EP, but also get so much more diving deep into the narrative laid out in front of them. Almost like a choose your own adventure EP. YMIR is just one of those artists that can really do it all. And I love that he tackled such a narratively and sonically dense record. You really outdone yourself. Before we get into my pick for the best EP of 2024, I want to quickly highlight some other projects that didn't quite make the top 10, but were great in their own right. I seriously mean it when I say that this was one of the best year for EDM EPs. Oh boy, number one, my favorite EP of the year. I'm almost giddy as I get to really talk about this project in full, and I really just want to jump right into things. So just as we pretty much started this list with Garage, we're gonna end it there too. It appears that we have arrived. Camoufly has peaked at just the right time. I have been following him for quite some time now, and I absolutely adore this EP for both the variety it brings and how catchy every track is. Even furthermore, as a garage fan, I've been dying to hear a fully modernized future garage project, and this is without a shadow of a doubt just that. When I hear people complain about how all EDM just sounds the same, I do get a little upset, for sure. Also justifiably sometimes, and also I get it sometimes. And moving forward though, I'm gonna show them this record. Each of the 5 tracks from this EP undoubtedly fall into that umbrella garage subgenre, yet tackle it from a variety of angles. Intuition is a bouncy, should I say kawaii bounce? Style of track that is easy for anyone to quickly get into. It's simple, yet an instant earworm, and you'll hear me say this a couple times, but mixed incredibly well. People is the second track and is this dark, underground cut that, quite frankly, is the opposite of Intuition with its dense sustains and eerie atmosphere. Only to be followed up by Touch, which is a return to the norm as both the middle ground physically in the track list and sonically right down the pipe of a more standard modern garage tune, with, you guessed it, an incredible mixdown. Space for Me is our penultimate track and offers us a taste of a more vocally driven track with a stronger emphasis on those vocal chops. Then No Fear Between Us closes us out, and while sadly I do think the finale was the weakest link of the EP, it's still a great track that does a fantastic job of wrapping up the whole thing in a neat little bow tie. Part of my love for Camoufly comes from their persona as a person. Their green knit bunny ear mask has now become iconic, and his demeanor online has always felt fun and like he's really doing it for just the love of music. Camoufly just last year landed on my number 5 spot on this very list, and he's only improved since then. A glow up I didn't even know was possible. I don't want to put unjust expectations on his upcoming 2025, but at this point, he's already secured himself as one of my favorite artists of the 2020s. Well, that's my list, my top 10 EDM EPs of 2024. I'm curious to know what you guys are thinking about my picks, and I'd love to hear that in the comment section below. I know there are quite a bit of relatively smaller artists on this list, so I'm at least hoping you walk away from this video with some more tunes to check out. But with that being said, I've been Dakota from Bowtied Media, and I'll see you guys in another video.